Thank you for tuning in. You're watching The Property Guide in ET Now. I'm Faye D'Souza. This is a very, very special episode. You know, exactly a week from right now, the Union Budget will be announced on the 28th of February. On this episode, we have two guests who are going to try and help us understand what to expect from that budget and how the budget might be able to make our dream homes a little more of a reality. Of course, if you have questions about how the budget will impact your home buying capabilities, write to us. Our email ID is at the bottom of your screen. Lalit Kumar Jain is the Chairman and Managing Director at Kumar Urban Development Limited. He's also the Chairman of Kanhaiya. He's been kind enough to join us on the show. Ravi Ahuja is the Executive Director at Cushman & Wakefield, India. Now, the Union Budget, which will be announced on the 28th, like I told you, is possibly going to be filled with various announcements about infrastructure, about roads, about railways, about land, about basically allowing each of us and each of our families to own a home. Because if we consider the possibility that that is what this government's final aim is, a home for every Indian by 2022, what can the budget do? What announcements can be here to make all of our markets more accessible? All right, let me start with Lalit. Lalit, come in here. I know that as the industry representative, Kanhaiya would have given the government a wish list saying this is ideally what we'd like from the budget. I also know that for several years now, the government has ignored that wish list year after year after year. What realistically, if I were to ask you what you're expecting from the budget this year, what would that be?
According to me, government doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. What they did in 1998, they need to revisit. See, there are two aspects as far as government's intentions are concerned. One is accelerating economic growth and second is provide homes to all. If we see current situation of housing, demand has slowed down and it has impacted the economy, it has impacted home buying capacities, so to say, and developers are really facing trouble with cash crunch. What I expect is government will take initiative to increase demand. Now, increased demand will be through two methods. One is, of course, the economic growth, which is a larger subject, and government will address this issue. However, second is to bring down cost of borrowing for home loans. Now, RBI in due course of time will reduce interest rate, but I don't think we have time enough.
So, Lalit, I'm going to interrupt you there. We know that, the RBI governor has made several attempts to explain to us that the RBI functions completely independently of what the government might want. So, like you said, the RBI will reduce rates whenever the RBI thinks that the time is right. But in the meantime, are you saying that you expect the government to offer some sort of lower interest rate schemes, perhaps for low-cost housing, for affordable housing, for any sort of housing loan? What would that, what would the exact recommendation be?
Tax-free housing bonds to be floated by HFIs to generate funds to be distributed for home loans is the solution which we propose. Now, 5% tax-free bonds will sell like anything, and 2% arbitrage. 7.5% home loan rate can move entire market, and it will be easier for home seekers to buy homes. Second, the cost of home. So, how do you make it affordable? See, we have suggested 4 reforms to government, and out of which tax reform and banking reform attain most importance.
We'll come back to you about that. I want to bring in Ravi here first. This is the interesting part, Ravi, the fact that the industry will always suggest that if you bring down interest rates, people will buy more homes. But if you ask the person on the street, they'll say if you bring down the actual rates of the homes which they're being sold at, then we'll buy homes. Because obviously the industry will be reluctant to bring down prices at this point. But how can the government make sure that homes are more accessible? Because we've talked about this several times. Sales have come down to almost a grinding halt. Prices are still not coming down. Builders are still holding on to prices. The prices in cities like Mumbai, for example, are still inching upwards beyond any sort of logic also. So if a government were to look at this situation, what possible solution could they offer us?
So I think the government will need to think not only from the supply side, but also demand side. and therefore there are a slew of measures that the government can take. So for example, on the supply side, we already saw the Maharashtra government take some new steps on the development plan, which is more long-term in nature. But we are hearing that on the transit corridors, there will be increase in FSI, and that would mean that more and more supply in these so-called corridors will come into play, and therefore they are doing whatever they can to increase the supply, and therefore more stock, higher FSI would mean automatically reduced land prices.
That's not really a solution, because if we look at the numbers right now, Mumbai is full of stock that's unsold. But if the prices don't come down, people don't buy, there's sort of a middle ground here that nobody is standing on. So increasing stock is not the solution to the problem.
No, so increasing stock will only make sure that the prices don't only remain stable, but they fall, right? So today prices have not fallen. Literally speaking, we are seeing indirect schemes of 2080, we are seeing indirect subvention of loan interest rates by developers, but nobody is directly cutting the rack rate down. We want to see that happen, and to see that happen, on one end, you have to increase supply, but on the other hand, when the prices do come down, you want to ensure that some interest rate subvention schemes, particularly on the affordable side, are into play, and therefore you create demand. Now you talk about input cost. Now that plays a big spoiler to the developer who wants to really bring the, genuinely want to bring the price down. So what does the government do? We are looking at unified tax reforms in the GST area, which will probably rationalize material costs and will ensure that cascading tax effects are not into play. And if this brings down the input cost, the developer may pass on to the consumer. So GST, across will probably have a solution again. So these are some of the measures I think the budget may,
Ideally then, single window clearance, higher FSI, better supply, and of course you're saying rationalization of taxes, for both on the back end and the front end then for builders. Lal, do you agree? Are these the solutions to bring down prices, to sort of make builders and buyers meet on that middle ground where nobody's standing on right now?
Single window clearance, you said, of course it's being state subject. Center will have to play carrot and stick and see that states really get into this reform where they really promote or accept removal of human elements into approval process and delay environment clearance, aviation clearance, and local state governments, various department clearances take 3 years. Now this doubles the land cost. So what we need to do is single window online clearance, and that too including clearances under central government departments. Now this is very important. Central government this time should provide some funds to accelerate this kind of platform, where they fund to create a platform and states then adopt it. Issue is housing is not an infrastructure even today. This is surprising. Housing is most important element. Urban areas contribute 75% of GDP to country. Housing being one of the most important aspect of urban development doesn't get infrastructure status is surprising, and therefore I hope this time government takes this step forward.
All right, so there are lots of demands from the government right now. The way the industry looks at this point, everybody's looking at everybody else saying, we don't have any cash to make this work, whether that's investors, buyers, or the actual builders. So this is the wish list right now. Clearances to move faster, land reform in order to make supply of land more available, better FSI in order to allow builders to build more, tax reform, banking reform, and an infrastructure status for the industry. But before I go into break, since we have Ravi here, Ravi, I have a question on Twitter from Kumar Rakesh, who's written in. He says, Tata Housing Amantra project has a 3565 scheme possession 2017. What kind of appreciation and rent can I expect from that project?
So this project is currently located at the Shilfata Kalyan location.
There isn't much going on in terms of an economy around that project. It's on the highway, isn't it?
Yeah, it's on the highway. There is much going on in terms of development with number of projects going around, and therefore the project, the prices are affordable when you relatively compare to Mumbai.
Yes.
But we must note that the prices have run up already in the last 3 to 4 years. So given that the prices here were launched at much lower and probably have gone up by 50 to 70% already, launching such a scheme would probably make sense more for an actual user and not an investor. Rentals are expected to remain subdued in terms of returns. One could expect 2%, 3% at max, given the large, supply.
It's the average around the city anyways.
Yeah, but yeah, here it could be as low as 2. In certain more prosperous locations, it would go up as high as 4 to 5%. Yeah.
So tell me this, now obviously Tata is not the only company that's offering this 35-65, 70-30, 80-20, we've been talking about it for a while, but the way it stands right now for an investor like this, and these schemes, when you're talking about the location and the ticket size, they're sort of to wield in the smaller investor at this point. What should I keep in mind if I'm looking or if I'm considering these projects, these schemes?
My only take is that one should keep in mind the track record of the developer to deliver that project, and ensure that the funding which is available to the developer, either through a private equity fund if he's partnered with one, or the finance companies that are already lending him, will ensure that the project is delivered. Sales are stagnant and therefore cash flows are crunched. One have to be very careful on the cycle of the project, because we do expect if FSI goes up the way the government wants, we do expect in 2 to 3 years' time a lot of stock to come in, and that could play a spoiler on the pricing.
All right, so this is what you should keep in mind if you're considering any of those 80-20, 35-65 sort of schemes. Make sure you pick a developer that has a good reputation in the market. Like Ravi was telling us, be very careful about where the developer's finances are coming from right now. And of course, like we always say, make sure you get a lawyer to read through the contract very carefully so you can limit your risk on any of those deals. Oh, welcome back. You're watching The Property Guide in ET Now. Thank you for staying with us. Both of our guests are still with us, and we're talking about what we could possibly expect from the Finance Minister in the Union Budget announcement that will happen on the 28th of Februari next week. Laliji, I want to come to you with this question. Now, there was a lot of talk about the possibility of a real estate regulator who would not only, streamline a lot of the processes, but also provide an avenue for investors and buyers who sort of felt they'd been wronged in any sort of deal in the market. How far away are we from having a real estate regulator right now? Has that been swept to the back burner at this point?
What we have suggested comprises a concept that all stakeholders are governed through regulator. Otherwise, the draft which was originally submitted by last government in Rajya Sabha, we called it Promotion of Corruption and Developers Harassment Act. So I hope the bill which this government will bring in will be much better in terms of its result orientedness.
Well, from what you've heard right now, will that bill be tabled anytime soon in Parliament?
I think so. I think so, because government is very serious about it.
All right, Ravi, what would you ideally like the real estate bill to look like right now? Do you think there's a possibility we might see, the local bodies that provide clearances be covered by that bill as well? Is there, any such precedence in anything else in the market right now?
Yes, so as Lalitji said, I think the bill has gone to and fro as many times and has incorporated a lot of views and opinions of the public, of the consumer, and of the developer community. This is one area on clearances and approvals that holds the developer tantamount, and therefore the developer, if he has to deliver to the consumer as per promise, he needs to ensure back-end approvals and clearances come on time. Having said that, I think clearances and approvals, and therefore holding quasi-government organizations, even like Mahada, Sitco and others, who dole out these approvals, it's important that we see how they become accountable in such a regulator regime. This is something I think which lacks or doesn't have teeth enough. But if we do this, I think then we will have a full circle.
All right, so that's something to look forward to as well. Lalji, I also want to ask you about REITs. This is again something that the entire industry has been asking for a while. Now, do you expect to hear from the Finance Minister some sort of clarity on the REITs taxation system? If yes, do you believe the product will be made available to investors in the year to come?
Yeah, you see, I think it is taking shape. Now, two things are remaining. Certain anomalies in taxation and capital gains tax on promoters' property being transferred to REIT. Also, state government will have to rationalize stamp duty on these transfers. So these two things if happen, then it will get accelerated surely.
All right, and Ravi, tell me this, if we do see REITs come in, if we do find that the taxation clarity on REITs does come in, what sort of an impact will that have on our industry altogether?
I think REITs is something which allows small investors, to participate in the commercial or in the rental income scenario where the values are very high. It's just like any other mutual fund. And therefore, I think it will be once the taxation angles are clarified, hopefully in this budget, and it takes off well, it is here to stay long term. And we will see a lot of institutional money coming in.
How much institutional money?
Well, the pipeline is huge. I don't want to risk putting a number right now, unless we see the tax reforms take shape. But huge foreign as well as domestic institutional money.
So, I mean, you're a consultant, so obviously people who are considering investing in India will come and talk to people like you first. So who's standing in the wings right now? What kind of money is waiting in the wings right now for something like this?
So, we already seeing not standing, but we're seeing implementation. So we've seen the likes of Blackstones. We hear about them every now and then in the newspaper. We saw GIC, taking a large, stake in the Nirlawn campus, which was again published in the press. Blackstone has bought a couple of SEZs and IT parks, and therefore these institutions, foreign institutions, are already creating, a pool of pre-leased assets, which eventually can be transferred into a REIT. And like I said, the foreign players are much in advantage given the 5 to 7% tax regime rather than domestic players. So, IPCs like us, consultants like us, probably eyeing the fund manager type of portfolios and pooling of assets for REITs. This is going to be a huge play.
All right, so REITs will definitely be a huge play and possibly offer investors like you and me an opportunity to get into that market as well. Welcome back. You're watching the Property Guide on ET Now. Thank you for staying with us. Of course, we have Lalit and Ravi with us in the studio right now. We're talking about budget expectations. Before we move any further, Lalit, tell me this. We also mentioned SEZ some time ago while we were talking. What sort of announcements are you expecting in that area from the budget?
See, what happened when SEZ soaps were announced, they were retrieved back, and that created huge resentment or negativity amongst investors, similarly like Vodafone case. So I expect government to honor the commitments made while initiating SEZs. See, SEZ can really move economy, move core industries, and I hope that bureaucracy do not come heavy on the policy makers, and SEZ really moves as a concept.
Well, Ravi, I want to bring you in here about this. If we are talking about the various different types of foreign investors who want to come into the country right now, also this government has made very clear the fact that they want to attract more foreign investment in the space of construction and housing. How important is the ease of doing business at this point? Because the government has to display the fact that it is pro-construction, pro-business, also that it's not going to flip-flop. Like Lalit was just telling us that it decided something about SEZs and that was taken away. So in terms of just tone and direction, what can we expect from the finance minister?
I think you've touched upon a very important point. So ease of doing business, which the Modi government has been tom-tomming about, and the intentions or the noise they're making are relevant, but we've not seen action on the ground. So for example, like the SEZ, taking away the SOPs at the time of initiation versus now putting in MAT and dividend distribution tax on SEZs was a big setback, and we saw SEZs fall as construction progressed, and we saw a lot of SEZs either withdrawing the SEZ infrastructure status they had and converting into just pure IT parks, or the large manufacturing SEZs also just went on stop because the tax exemptions were taken away.
Also, for example, if they want projects like the DIMC to take off or Gift City in Gujarat to take off, then these sort of things will have to be made very clear.
Very true. And in fact, the government doesn't need to go far. In its maiden budget, it doled out all kind of SOPs.
Yes.
All the government needs to do is make sure the intent is further clarified. You talk about affordable housing. They have actually created FDI-free, attraction to affordable housing. And that's huge. So you have the wherewithal to go out and raise the funds. Likewise, the government talked about warehousing, an allocated fund of about 5,000 crore. NHA, I got a huge 37,000 crore allocated, if you remember, in the maiden budget. Has that 8,500 kilometer roadway on the national highway ever built till today? The government just has to make sure that it implements its intent, even if they missed out on this year, probably continue with the same vigor and implement.
Well, Lalit, is it about funding infrastructure or is it about implementing infrastructure? Because for people who construct homes and for people who buy homes, the roads, the railways, everything that, joins the dots perhaps is something that we're going to keep an eye on in this budget. So when you talk about funding for infrastructure and implementation of that funding, how important will that be in this budget?
See, infrastructure, India requires more than $1 trillion of infrastructure, and in fact this was a proposal in a 5-year plan which was never implemented for next 2 5-year plans. Point is, government will have to come up with very innovative methods to invite investment into infrastructure, and while they do it, it's very easy for government to incentivize housing to kickstart this growth, to rotate funds and also lift confidence of investors globally to invest into infrastructure.
So remember that Union Budget will be announced on the 28th of February next week, and on ET Now we'll be right here to answer any question you might have about something you might have heard on the budget and how it affects your ability to buy a home. Lalit and Ravi, thank you so much for spending time with us this week and answering our questions. Email ID is at the bottom of your screen. Tweet out a question if you have, and if you'd like to join us in the studio on Budget Day and ask your question in person, get in touch and write out your question as well. Thank you so much for watching.